Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, guys. My name is Jeff, and you're watching The Verses, where our goal is to promote, especially the work of underrepresented poets and writers, but we're also working to help achieve financial stability for our work and things like that. And one of the things that we have done on Threads is we've asked people to send us some poems to take a look at. We did even a live stream last week, part of the Verses Live. Last week was all about just trying to look at people's work, and we didn't quite finish all the poems. So our goal right now is to one, wrap up some of the poems that we did not get to from last week, and two, also try to get through some additional poems that have been sent to us today. Now, as we go through people's poems, please do keep in mind that these are not attacks on the work. These are not attacks on the poem. These are, or even on the poet. These are not attacks on the poet either, of course. These are just things that kind of jump out at me just on an initial reading. I have not thoroughly read any of these pieces to kind of get that initial reaction. For instance, if you were submitting to a journal or just trying to get into publication, editors are going to be reading blind. So we're kind of approaching it that way as well. But we get to let you know about the things that stand out to us immediately, which may or may not be what you intend. So as we go through these, certainly will be also be paying attention to things like what your speaker's doing, the logic of the poem, the turn, things like titles, first lines, closings, and anything that stands out to you. So if you send us a poem or you're interested in sending us a poem in the future, one, you can do that if you go onto Threads and then you tag us at the Versus Poetry. But you can also let us know about a specific area of focus that you have about a poem, so that way we can get you the best feedback possible. I will say we're in the middle of a thunderstorm right now, so if the power goes out or connection gets kind of wonky, my apologies for that. But without further ado, let's take a look at our first poem here. I'm going to share my screen so hopefully you guys can all see this. And we'll get through some initial thoughts. Actually, makes it a little bigger. Okay, so here is our first poem by Less Ethereal. I want to thank them for their patience sending us this piece previously. So just to read it really quick, we don't have a title, at least at the moment. The old Tom moves like the moon across a fence. Unlikely caretaker. Baby's breath. Okay. So things that kind of stand out. I always like to kind of just begin by looking at what's going on visually. Okay, so the thing that kind of jumps out is relatively short first line, longer second line, and then everything else kind of falls in. So the second line is your longest line, first line is your shortest. Other things I always kind of like to start with just first line, last line. So the old Tom, especially if we don't have a title. So the old Tom, I guess like a cat. That's how I'm interpreting like a tomcat. Could be way wrong. But I think it fits with the image. And then baby's breath being the flower, the plant, or maybe an actual baby's breath. Okay, the old Tom moves like the moon. That is a very intriguing line. So it gives that sense of being night in terms of your setting, although it doesn't have to be right. It's just a comparison like the moon. Unless it's saying the old Tom moves just like how the moon is moving right now across the fence. So it's a little bit tricky in terms of knowing, am I supposed to be also associating the scene with the night? Personally, I am, but again, it doesn't have to be that way. Moves across the fence. Unlikely caretaker. I'm always trying to make connections logically, which isn't always the best strategy in a poem. But looking through this, I imagine that the caretaker is referring back to the old Tom from our first line. And then we finish with the baby's breath. So that's the other option, right? Is that the caretaker could actually be the baby's breath. So one thing from a reader's perspective, I'm not entirely sure how I'm supposed to interpret is Is the caretaker referring to the baby's breath of the last line, or is it referring back to the old Tom in the first line? So that's something I'm not personally entirely sure about. Other things that are kind of jumping out at me: the old Tom moves like the moon across the fence. I like the idea of this image. Moves like the moon across the fence. I think the repetition of those M sounds and those oo sounds, moo moo, moves like the moon. That's acoustically very pleasing. I think that's a good word choice there. I think one thing that would give me a lot more direction in terms of how I'm supposed to be reading this is having some sort of tone, because right now I'm not entirely sure how I'm supposed to feel about these things. And I'm not entirely sure how the Tom seems like the central character in this. I also don't really know how the old Tom feels. If I don't know how old Tom feels, that's making it also a little bit more difficult for me, from a reader's perspective, to know how I'm supposed to feel. So I end the poem being like, "Oh, that was an interesting moment," but I don't know what to make of it. Like, the fact that the old Tom is moving like the moon, how am I supposed to feel about that? Is that a negative thing? Is that a positive thing? Is that something I should be suspicious of, wary of? Is that something I should be happy about? And then the other big moment that I have a lot of uncertainty about is that unlikely caretaker. So unlikely caretaker, cool, but I also don't know. I don't know enough about how they feel about the caretaker thing. So, for instance, are they happy about being a caretaker, especially with the unlikely? Unlikely is a very strong word there, right? So they weren't expecting that to happen. But I don't know enough about, the emotional investment. The other thing that's kind of missing here a bit is the stakes. So unlikely caretaker. Well, I don't know what exactly is being taken care of. Is it the baby's breath? Is it something else? Is the baby's breath taken care of the whole time? Kind of talked about that earlier. The other thing I don't know what's at stake. Like the caretaker role. What happens if this caretaker role isn't, like, it doesn't happen, or if they fail at it? I don't know the implications here. And that's not to say the poem needs to explore those things, but these are the tensions that typically are moving a piece forward. Like, typically when you have a poem or you have a story, there's some sort of central tension. And to me, it feels like this unlikely caretaker moment is where the heart of that tension is occurring. But I don't feel like I'm given enough information to know the full implications, or even the greater implications. I don't need to know all the implications, but something would really be helpful to me. And the way it's written right now, I'm kind of just left grasping. Besides that, the old Tom moves like the moon. Old Tom moves like the moon across the fence, unlikely caretaker baby's breath. Rhythmically, so you have typically a lot of these lines have two heavy stresses. Old Tom moves, moon, cross, fence, baby's breath. That unlikely caretaker completely disrupts the rhythm, in a very interesting way. It's surprising. It kind of goes back at that unlikely nature of it, right? You would expect it to kind of fall into the same rhythm of the rest of the poem, but that's the line where it kind of breaks. So if there's any turn in the poem, definitely again seems to be happening there. Also for the reasons we discussed earlier. There's a lot of repetition of sounds as well. I like the acoustics of this. Old Tom. It's like oh, and then the ah, then the ooh and the ooh. Like cross fence with the S sounds. Unlikely caretaker. You have those T's and those K sounds. And baby's breath. It's like the A, E, eh. I just having worked with a lot of students on like pronunciation things. That A sound and baby and also that S sound and breath, those are commonly confused Vowel sounds, people learning English. So you have some similar sounds there, but also with the B sounds. So I think acoustically, there's a lot of things here that are working really well. Yeah, I think the big thing is I would just be asking what I don't know enough about the emotional investment I'm supposed to have here, and I also don't know enough about what's at stake for the Tom, the in the this caretaker role. Those are things that I think would really give me a lot more direction from a reader's perspective in terms of how I'm supposed to interpret this. But you guys can let me know what your thoughts are. I do want to thank Astero for sending us this piece. Greatly appreciate it. We're going to move on to our next one. Got a poem here by Kirk. If I'm reading that right, Kirk Mills Ward. Thank you for sending us this piece. And of course, as we're going through this, guys, whether you're watching this with us live or you're watching with us sometime in the future, hi. Let us know what your thoughts are. Agree, disagree, other things that stood out to you that maybe we missed. All those things would be great to know. I'm interpreting this as the title. Still not entirely sure. Questions in the cold, small hours. Okay. When I can't sleep and you're not there, I think about all the things that had to happen just for me to exist. Hot, dense creation, exponential expansion, young adults and their mistakes, time and its nonlinear state. The universes where we met but didn't click, the ones where we did, the ones where I sit, the infinite decisions, the many versions of me. I think about what makes us human and what sets us free. Is it language, empathy, art, or is it love? Ending on some big questions there. Thanks again for sending us this piece, Kurt. Okay. Questions in the cold, small hours. Okay. So if this, assuming this is the title, some things. So we have a speaker who is awake, presumably in a colder climate or the winter. You can imagine it's probably dark. Questions in the and you kind of get this sense just from reading the title again, the sense of a speaker who's unable to go to bed because their minds are kind of racing, asking these sorts of questions. So there's something that's kind of worrying the speaker or on their mind. And that also kind of implies, in my opinion, maybe a little bit of frustration because this is the time when they should be asleep, but they're unable to. Which all seem to be confirmed by the first line as well. When I can't sleep and you're not there, I can't sleep. You're not there. I like the punchiness. When I can't sleep and you're not there, so you have a lot of you have this mirroring going on in that first line. You have the same rhythm, different words, but same rhythm. When I can't sleep and you're not there, so weak, stressed, and heavy, followed by a weaker, weak, stress, heavy, and weaker, weaker. Assuming that you're stressing the I and the you're. Okay. When I can't sleep and you're not there, so we have a speaker who is alone, but usually the other person is there. That seems to be kind of what's implied. When I can't sleep and you're not there, I think about all the things that had to happen just for me to exist. Guess there's pondering some huge, huge thoughts going on at this moment. Think about all the things that had to happen just for me to exist. So kind of reflecting on again, just like chance and the infinitesimal odds that we would even come to be here. Okay. Hot, dense creation. I like those adjectives with creation. That's very powerful. Heavy one syllable words. Hot, dense, exponential expansion. Again, acoustically, I think that's nice. Exponential expansion. Young adults and their mistakes. Okay, so we've gone from these like huge, really abstract notions, hot, dense creation, exponential expansion, huge ideas, and then we get to the much more concrete young adults and their mistakes. It's more concrete. It's also it's certainly more narrow in scale compared to creation and expansion. Although it's also remaining a bit general. 'Cause we don't know mistakes. Perhaps associating the birth of the speaker with a mistake. Um, time Hey, we back. Sorry, it took a minute. Sorry about the storm. The universe is where we met, but didn't click. Okay, so again, kind of bringing to mind all the possibilities. Kind of plays back with the expansion bit. Universe is where we met, but didn't click. The ones where we did. The one where I sit. Like that play. So the universe is big. The ones where we did, maybe slightly more narrow. And then the one where I sit, most narrow. The infinite decisions, the many versions of me. Okay. One thing. Mistakes. Okay. Interesting that this is the only line that uses sentences and not questions that has no punctuation, right? But it does have that capital TH. I mean, capital T on the. That's an interesting break there. The infinite decisions, the many versions of me. I think about what makes us human and what sets us free. That's an interesting line because I don't. It implies a contrast between being human and being free. Although they don't. It doesn't have to be like that, right? What makes us human? That's one thing, and then what sets us free? That's a whole other thing. So maybe they're not connected, but that's seems to be kind of implied by the language. Formatting a little interesting with like sets us free. On the one hand, if the line break is intentional and it's not just the platform doing that, that is an interesting break because it's your longest line in the poem. Is the longest line actually? Well, longest line visually, although the line I think about all the things that had to happen just for me to exist. That technically may be longer, but this visually is the longest line. And so that's kind of an interesting idea having that line break. What sets us free, and then the us free by itself on a line kind of reiterates it reinforces that concept of the freeing, right? Because you have this long line, or like every other line's kind of been predictable in its length, and then you have this one that's like longer than the others and it has that unpredictable enjambment, and that reinforces the idea of being free. I'm no longer being held to the confines of the poem, right? I'm gonna just have a line that says "us free." So if that's intentional, I think it could work. It's a little jarring, but it can work. And then after that, we also get other structural differences, right? Is it language, empathy, art, or is it love? So we haven't had questions the whole poem. Besides the title, questions in the cold some hours, and then we get the actual questions. So we haven't had we've had thoughts, but we haven't had questions until this moment in the poem. Is it language, empathy, art, or is it love? Now we don't know what has caused the speaker to arrive at each of these things. Is it language? Why they thought language? Why they thought empathy? Why they thought art? Or what made them change their mind ultimately at the end? And maybe we consider love. Um. Okay. Other things that are kind of sticking out about the poem. I think kind of similar to the previous poem. One thing is that we have this moment and kind of suggestions of emotion, but I think having something that's a little bit that acts a little bit more as a guide to let us know where the speaker is emotionally, because that's the one character we really get to know the most here. Um, because having that and a greater sense of the tone of the piece would help me have a greater understanding of the impact of the last line. I feel like that last line is supposed to be, like a mic drop kind of moment. But in this current state, I don't know enough. I feel for it to really carry the weight that's intended. When I can't sleep and you're not there, some implied frustration there, but even that's implied. So when this other person's not there, we also don't know how often this is. So this kind of sounds habitual, right? When I can't sleep and you're not there. See that present tense can't, which again kind of implies just a general fact or situation. So this may not be the first time the speaker has even gone through all these things. Okay, so if that is the case, so if this is something the speaker has gone through before, but that's another way you can kind of give some guidance to the readers. Like, how does the speaker feel about? Oh man, here we are again going through these questions that always come to mind. Um, it's also kind of having more. And the poem doesn't have to do this, but something I think would be helpful would have more insights into what's leading to this sort of questioning. What's leading to us What's leading us to ponder these sorts of questions? What's leading us to ponder what makes us human, what sets us free? Like, I'm guessing this is a loving relationship between the speaker and the other person, um, which again would imply some weight with the last line. But I don't. I mean, the you completely disappears, right? When I can't sleep and you're not there, I guess it comes back with the we. The universe is where we meet. Let's assume that it's the same person, right? The you is also the you and the we, right? Versus where we met but didn't click, the ones where we did, the one where I sit. Yeah, I guess the big thing is I think if I were allowed more room to get into the insights of what's driving some of these specific questions, is there a fear here? Or is there more amazement? Just like, man, there was so many possibilities that I wouldn't be in the universe where we would be together, right? I guess I'm kind of missing the connection between a lot of these questions, a lot of these like kind of like universal, all the universes, a lot of thinking about that. But then I think about what makes us human, what sets us free. Like the logic of the questions being asked, there are some things that are bring up about creation, but then some of the other ones don't feel as connected to me about being human and being free. And maybe they don't have to, because I'm again, maybe you're just kind of lying in bed, just stream of consciousness. Like this question happens, but I don't know about the others. But that also could be helpful in terms of knowing a specific driving force behind these questions. Yeah, so those are kind of just the quick, rapid thoughts I have for this specific piece. Let us know what again your thoughts are on this piece. If things I missed, things I'm just not getting. But I think having an idea of a greater sense of tone that you would like to carry through, and that you want your reader to feel, and that you want your speaker to convey as well, I think that could help kind of guide me in my reading and make that last line feel a little more impactful. But thanks to Kurt sending us the piece. Really appreciate it. Okay. Our next piece here, MX, what's that mix? Mix Media Inc. This one's called Fizzy. Now, they do ask us love some feedback on structure. What do we think about their structure? Okay. Fizzy. Can you imagine a time when you felt so sublime that wine sang as it slid down your throat? You laughed and joked without a choke of tears except laughter. Can you toast happily ever after? Okay. Interesting things going on with the rhyme. Time, sublime, it, throat, off rhyme, or just unintentional? I'm guessing off rhyme. Laughed and joked without a choke of, okay, laughter after. Yeah, so basically A, B, B, C, C, D, D for your rhyme scheme, I'm guessing. Okay. Is there a meter? Can you imagine a time when you felt so sublime? Okay, slight break there. That wine sang as it slid down your throat. I don't think not a whole lot of meter in that second group. Okay. You laughed and joked without a choke of adding a syllable. Tears except laughter. Can you toast happily ever after? And then that last line, very much not in the rhythm. So I don't think we're following a meter, at least not one I'm familiar with. Title's called Fizzy. Okay. Um, fizzy, fizzy, fizzy. Is the fizzy in reference back to the wine? Like the drink? I'm guessing. Can you imagine a time when you felt so sublime that wine saying isn't? An interesting question, right? Because is there intended like, oh yes, I can totally remember a time like this, or is it just kind of like a hypothetical, like, oh no, you've never actually felt this before? Although based on kind of what's happening in the poem, I think that the you has had this experience because the moment's captured again. You laughed and joked. Like, can you imagine this time? But then that guy, I get a little bit confused on the logic because it's like it almost becomes more like, do you remember the time? You know, say, can you imagine? Right? Do you remember the time? Especially if it actually happened versus imagining. So I guess I'm a little bit confused about the imagining versus the reality of the poem. Um, I want to make sure we also adhere to the actual question. So they want some ideas on structure. Okay. I don't really follow any poetry rules. Okay, so you have a rhyme scheme, it seems. Okay, so we'll kind of highlight structure on this piece. So you have a rhyme scheme. So some things you want to kind of ask yourself: why do you have a rhyme scheme? And it's not like a critique, like don't do it. This is no, just what? How does having a rhyme scheme enhance the poem? And if you have reasons, great. And if you don't have reasons, you can find them, or you could be like, maybe the rhyme scheme's not serving the poem. I don't have a specific opinion either way. I think you can make an argument. The rhyme scheme, one thing it's doing is it is causing the poem to feel a little bit lighter in terms like the emotional weight. Okay, it's not as heavy, or at least it doesn't feel as heavy. It might actually be super heavy, but it kind of covers it to a degree. Um, there's not focus on the you, right? The speaker is, I guess, the implied person asking the question and making the commentary and the projection, but we don't entirely know. In a lot of ways, the speaker is kind of removed. If you another thing too about rhyme is if you're going to stick with rhyme, one thing you might want to consider is meter as well. You almost have some meter things happening. Like, can you imagine a time when you felt so sublime? So that can work. That wine sang as it slid down your throat. That rhyme gets a little bit off. So I would consider maybe some meter, some regular meter. Okay, you can break occasionally as you see fit. But like, you could use all I ams like da imagine a time now, then you're getting it's like the actual territory and things like that. But I would maybe consider some meter for this. If you're going to use a rhyme scheme, because that last line in particular is really breaking your meter. Your rhythm and what came before it. Can you toast happily ever after? That's a very long line here. And I think that's kind of something that for rhymed poems, one of the reasons people use meter is because otherwise it just kind of feels like, oh, you can just rhyme whenever you want. Like this line will only have 2 words, and the next line will have like 10 words. And so you're going to make it rhyme. Rhyming is a very tricky thing to pull off. Going back to that structure question. Another thing you can ask yourself too: why 4 and 4? You have a very clear break in between. How does the poem change if you use couplets? How does the poem change if you use threes? 3 3, like a 3 3 2 or 3 2 3. So how does the poem change if it's just a single block? Yeah, and again, these aren't to say to do these things, but just kind of experiment and kind of see what you get and how that impacts things. Some general things. When you have couplets, that usually a lot of times implies balance. Kind of like a healthy relationship, stability. And when you have 3 lines, a lot of times that implies instability because it's not as balanced. When you have a single line, that's a lot of independence or a rupture from something. So not to say that that always works out that way, but just some things to consider. The other thing I'm kind of trying to get through here. Can you imagine a time when you felt so sublime? That wine sang as it slid down your throat. Okay, and I'm guessing that kind of bounces back or gets back to the fizziness, like you can kind of feel it. That's interesting if that is what's happening, using fizziness to refer to the singing and kind of like the brightness of that. I think that's an interesting word choice. But I guess the sublime aspect's kind of tricky. So why is that sublime? If that is the case, there are bubbly wines. So then is that really that sublime if wine is doing that? Or maybe this person doesn't really drink a whole lot. I don't know. You laughed and joked without a choke of tears except laughter. Laughed and joked without a choke of tears. I get the choking without a choke of tears, so I guess as in like without like crying, like without sadness. It's like this is a happy moment for the year for the you, but it also kind of implies some potential tension because this poem is existing in a world where there is choking, where the speaker is aware of choking and in pain. It's not happening in this moment, but the speaker's aware of it, right? You laughed and joked without a choke of tears except laughter. Can you toast happily ever after? There's a lot of kind of similar to the last poem we looked at. There's a lot of weight suggested by this last line. Can you toast happily ever after? Because you asked that sort of question, and the implication is no, or that no is a possibility. Why? But the question then becomes, well, why aren't you going to toast it? Why would you not want to toast happily ever after? That's kind of the big question that's implied by this last line. And I don't know enough information to explain that kind of doubt, hesitancy, or uncertainty from the speaker. Can you imagine time we felt some love? You laughed and joked without a choke of tears except laughter. Okay. Without a choke of tears. Also, like, without a choke of tears except laughter. I'm getting that sense of like, oh, like you just laugh so hard that you start crying. That's kind of how I take that, but I don't know if that's right. Yeah, so I think my big thing is that last question is that's a big statement to make. Has it been earned? And if it has been earned, where in the poem does that happen? Just taking one final moment to kind of read through this. You imagine that. You felt so sublime. Yeah, there's some really interesting inversions that happen. Like we felt so sublime that wine sang as it slid down your throat. Because that there's that kind of sense of joy, but also that kind of I don't know if it's quite if like menace is the right word, but like saying as it slid down your throat. Like the slid down your throat part. There's some I'm kind of it kind of gives me a little bit of pause. It's not like gliding or like you know the like slid to me doesn't have like the emotional weight of like positivity, like or like bouncing or things like that. Slid down almost has this sense of kind of like lack of control or a slightly heaviness or a slight negativity. So you have this moment that's really happy, and then that slid down your throat part that's like, that's interesting. Maybe slightly more negative in some ways. And then the next stanza doing a very similar thing, laughed and joke again, positive, happy images. But then we get that word choke of tears again, but the heavy images kind of coming out of nowhere. And that's also kind of seen again with the very last line as well. Can you toast happily ever after? Again, sounds really happy, sounds really positive, but then the idea of like, wait a minute, can you actually toast this? Are you going to toast this? And then, which means there's a possibility that you're not. But I don't know enough of the reasons why that wouldn't happen. And I think that's going to be the key for making that ending pop. Anyways, those are kind of just the first things that jump out at me. I gave some suggestions again on just kind of like structure and things like that. So I do hope you find that helpful. Um, I think playing around with meter, if you want to keep the rhymes, will be really, really, really helpful. Okay. I see other things too. Snozzle's here. What's up? Thank you for checking this out. Exactly. So Slid again has a talking about the emotional weight of Slid, because to me everything that came before is just so much lighter, and then Slid comes around. It's just it takes the emotion down a notch, and that contrast kind of that inversion just kind of keeps happening throughout the poem. Like it feels like there's kind of like a lot of weight and darkness to this poem that also has this a lot of like joy and happiness. So it feels kind of double edged. Okay. Moving on to our next piece. How many we got left? So I got one, two. Sons, if you're here, we'll take a look at yours. Or Sunzi. It's E, right? With an I at the end. Okay, I'm gonna focus just on this first section. There were many, many sections, and I just don't feel like I'll be able to give them all justice because it's late. I was watching my son and stuff. I'll be honest, I am tired. I want to make sure we don't get too loopy while reading poems. I'll be happy to take a look at some of the other sections in the future. Poem's called The Apprentice. Okay. Got some dialogue going on. Take a look at this. The Apprentice. You lack perspective, she explained. That's why your magic doesn't work. Perceive the elements contained in words. Be one with them, she smirked. You'll get it soon enough. With that, she left the room and left him sat alone on top of the tutor's tower, in which he studied spells for hours. He'd spoken every word he read, All incantations from the past, all charms the sages had amassed, all lyrics, tips from masters dead for nothing. He just couldn't cast a singing spell. He felt aghast. Quick note, is it a singing spell or a single spell? That is kind of a word choice, just based on context. Um, but let's assume that singing is the right word. Okay. Interesting font. If you're here, let me know what font that was for the top part with the Apprentice. Okay. And it is singing. Okay, cool. Thank you for just double checking. Thank you. Thank you. And he sings the spell there. Okay. I just based on context, I thought it was singing because it's the incantations, lyrics, especially lyrics. Okay. You lack perspective. So start off with the title. Okay, so the title Apprentice. So you have a sense of like beginner, but also surrounded by other people who are experts and things like that. Okay. So already there can be some tensions and things like that. You battles between person who's learning versus people who already are farther along in the process. So it's like those are things already apparent just from the title. You lack perspective, she explained. Okay, so we have the she. She's the first person to talk. The statement again is kind of implying that sense of authority that we mentioned earlier. That comes with apprenticeship. Okay. That's why your magic doesn't work. Okay, so already, something that we kind of missing some of the previous pieces and that we discussed a little bit was like tension. Kind of what's the driving tension. And already just in these first two lines, the tension becomes a lot clearer. We have the you. We don't know who the you is yet, but we have this you who's unable to do something, who wants to do something. I imagine that he's the apprentice or they're the apprentice. And there's other people around them who can do the thing. Okay, so for instance, the she providing some feedback, not friendly feedback. It kind of feels it's almost like backhanded a little bit. Like you lack perspective. That's why you're bad. Like don't feel bad. You just lack perspective. That's why your magic doesn't work. Like it could be encouraging, but kind of the tone's a little bit unclear. Not exactly the friendliest wording. Perceive the elements contained in words. Okay, so this is the secret to the spell. Almost feels like an Ars Poetica. Perceive the elements contained in words, be one with them. She smirked. You'll get it soon enough. Okay, so she's expressed some confidence, but she also is not expecting him to get it overnight. She knows he's gonna have to, or they're gonna have to work at it more. With that, she left the room and left him sitting alone on top of the tutor's tower, in which he studied spells for hours. Okay. Alone on top. The tutor's tower, in which he studied spells for hours. Okay, so we get the sense that he's doing a lot of work. Okay. So there's a lot of grounding going on. So we had a quick, wasn't even a conversation, kind of just one person saying everything. He has not spoken. That's very ironic. You have this stanza all about speech and the power of words and things like that. And indirectly, we're told that he talks, but he never actually even talks in this section at all, which is interesting. So the power is kind of being taken away from him. He can't do the thing because he literally can't even get a word out in this stanza. So set on top. He'd spoken every word he read, all incantations from the past. Okay, so these are things that have a history to them, not things from the present. All charms the sages had amassed. Okay, so he's relying on things, he's relying on history to try to advance. All lyrics, tips from masters dead. I'm not the biggest fan of the word tips here. It kind of breaks from the word. The word choice here is very specific. It's like perceive the elements contained in words. Tutor's tower, Studied spells, spoken every word, all incantations, charms, sages, amassed lyrics. We have a word choice here that I think has been very consistent. It feels appropriate, but tips feels too colloquial in some ways. I think it's kind of breaking from the tone. Tips from masters dead for nothing. He just couldn't cast a singing spell. Okay. He felt aghast. Okay, so I think out of all the pieces we've seen tonight, this is the piece that has the clearest emotion, clearest frustrations. I get what's happening with the speaker. It's you can put yourself in their shoes. It's frustrating them. You can see how other people are viewing that frustration. See the effort he's doing. We don't entirely know what's at stake, but again, this is the first section of many, so don't even necessarily need to know that. How many lines do we have? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14. Okay, so sonnet. Explained, work, contained, smirked. That set. Interesting switch of the rhyme scheme. So what does that do when so we have a sonnet structure. How is that helping the poem? That's just kind of thinking about how having the rhyme scheme in the sonnet is helpful. It kind of captures that sense. One, you have an ancient form, very old form of poetry. So kind of going back to mirroring those old spells and things, which is cool. It also mirroring the spells in the sense of fire. There's that sense of order. You have to say things the right way. How does having it as one block affect it versus having the traditional spacing? Let's check our turn. Okay, so your first opening 4 lines. That's when most of the conversation happens. So opening 4 lines, your first stanza. That's when she's doing most of the talking. Then you have your second quatrain. This kind of giving him he's now alone. Okay, and then you have your turn. He'd spoken every word he read. That's so kind of pretty much following the structure of a sonnet. I think it works as one block. You can experiment with line breaks and see if you like those too, but I think this is fine. Other things, since Sanzi, if you're watching this and you have some specific questions for me about the piece, let me know. That is interesting having all the lines together. Just goes back to that reference earlier, which says perceive the elements contained in words, be one with them, and keeping a single stanza too kind of harkens back to that, which I like. What's that? There were some interesting word choices that work, but now again, seeing the kind of sonnet structure, like, oh, so that's why it got worded that way. Because the moments where that happens specifically, give me a moment. Sorry, I know this really zoomed out. But just to kind of show you the moments where it's like, that's the kind of interesting word choice, a little awkward. And I know why you had to do it. You're keeping the rhyme scheme and things, but left him sat on top. Like it's fine, but just kind of reads. For me, it read a little bit awkwardly, but I get it. If we're trying to adhere to the meter and things. All charms the stages had amassed all lyrics tips from masters dead. I mentioned again that kind of slightly different word choice for tips. Tips from for nothing. I like that dash after nothing. Kind of reinforces the nothing. I like that a lot. Let's imagine alliteration with the T's. Alliteration with the T's. Got you. Yeah, I mean, I think from the poem about spells. Okay, I can get that. I could get that. So I'm trying to imagine, like, for instance, I don't know what your intentions are with the piece. Are you planning on getting this like published? Are you trying to what are kind of the big goals that you have for this piece moving forward? It's also interesting too because they're like choosing sonnet versus like a prose. The prose might allow you to kind of go deeper into some of these moments, and kind of draw things out more. But obviously, that doesn't seem to be the intention. But I'm just kind of curious about why choose the poem versus prose for a genre. That's why your magic doesn't work. Seeing elements contained in words, be one with them. Yeah. So I'm just saying it was just a test. What kind of test? When you say it's a test, what are you testing out? Just like telling a story through sonnet. Unfortunately, I don't have the. I know you sent me the link to everything, but unfortunately, I only have this first group, so I don't know if the others are also sonnets as well. Spoken every word he read. Pencil, charms, stages, and a math. Yeah. One thing I really like is the respect that's kind of given to to history. Okay. So, for instance, again, like the incantations from the past, the sages, the masters, and even the she. Okay. Mention everything is in the sonnet. Cool. There are places that, if you're trying to do like a chapbook or something like that, or I don't know how big this whole thing will be, um, there's probably places I'll be interested. Words. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot else to say. I like the experiment. I think it's working well. I think there's some clear tensions going on. Um, yeah, I enjoyed the read. If you had a specific question about anything here, be sure to let me know. But I think for what this is doing as the opening to these sections, I think this is doing a lot of work in a relatively limited space. I think it's adhering to the kind of just the sonnet structure pretty well. Yeah. I that's all I got. If you have a specific question, let me know. But I think this is a good start. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. Cool. I'll leave that up just because you do have a question that comes to mind. But this is our last. I believe this is our last one that we see. Okay, another. Okay, I think it's saying this is the blue, a little hard to see. Okay, so this one is from I forget. No, thank you for sharing. I enjoyed the read. Okay, so this is our last piece from the prose-ish. Is it a poem? Prose poem? Looks more like prose. I am no expert in prose, just to be clear. But I will do my best. Snooze letter, volcano room. I'm sitting in the sauna. That matches well with the volcano room. And I'm up on the higher level, not to brag. Had my eyes closed like a Dalmatian getting pink, basking in the Croatian sun. I hear a blasting geyser and the sound of a new waterfall. I maintain drowsy Dalmatian pose and figure some dude just dumped water on his head. Then the next geyser sound makes this old Dalmatian roll back over to wet earth. The second geyser sound had a gurgle. It was that dude dumping water, but from his stomach. I'm a little confused. His stomach dumped out a water cooler of water like he was telling the sauna steps, "Good game, coach." Evidently, all the rest of us in the sauna watch too much football because, interesting spelling choice, our collective instinct was to cheer and high five whenever we hear a water cooler dump. We charioted the sauna steps on our shoulders a couple laps around the building before we realized the sauna steps were not the football coach of a winning team. We went back to the water cooler, who was real apologetic. We said it was okay. Then he left and staff cleared the sauna. On my way out, I hear one staff dude's ask, "So who won?" And I didn't have the heart to tell him no one. I'll be honest, I'm a little confused. But I'm going to try to work through this to figure out that confusion. Okay. So, snooze alert, volcano room. Okay, so volcano room, imagine some place that's hot. We got some geysers and things like that. I remember from the work. Okay. We have a speaker. Speaker's in the sauna. So I'm just going to kind of go through this. So some of the before we get too deep, word choice things. You guys can let me know what your thoughts are on the word choice. Most of it I'm okay with. The cuz kind of threw me off. I get there is some informal things, sitting, um, and things, but the cuz really kind of took me out for a moment. And maybe that's just me, but compared to everything else, because this is cuz in the same lines. Like evidently, our collective instinct was to cheer and high five. Like we have these kind of we're mixing like language registers. I feel, and while I'm fine with most of it. It's just that cuz kind of really stands out to me because it really breaks from that register a lot. Anyways, okay, so I'm just gonna kind of read through this and make sure I'm understanding the logic. Okay, so I'm in the sauna. He's on the higher level, not to brag. Okay, so this higher level is a prestigious place. People want the higher level. It's like, hey, not to brag. Look at me all the way up here. Okay. Have my eyes closed like a Dalmatian getting pink, basking in the Croatian sun. I get it, but at the same time, I mean, a Dalmatian doesn't really even get pink because it's fur. Fur doesn't get pink. Am I missing something? No. So it's like I get the metaphor, but I kind of don't get the metaphor. Or I guess simile. I get the figurative, I get the illusion, but I'm like, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I don't really know if I get this. Um, I hear a blasting geyser and the sound of a new waterfall. To be clear, the geyser and the waterfall are the same thing, or are they two separate things? Um, Just let me assume that's the same thing. I maintain drowsy Dalmatian pose. Okay, so you get the reference back to what was happening earlier. Cool. But I think that's fine. I figure some dude just dumped water on his head. Okay. From the sauna. Okay. I am not a person who goes to saunas a lot. So there might be some sauna things that are just like going way over me and like hot springs and things like that. And I just don't do them. Then the next geyser sound. Another thing I'm a little bit confused by is tense, because we kind of bounce around a lot. I'm sitting in the sauna. I'm up on the higher level. Had my eyes closed. Shouldn't it be like have my eyes closed? So just kind of watch some tense stuff. Maintain. Figure some dude just dumped. Then the next geyser sound makes this old Dalmatian roll back. Okay. So that if we change the had to have, this helps me with this line down here, tense wise. The next geyser sound makes this old Dalmatian roll back over to wet earth. Is this a? I guess this is like a natural kind of sauna, like a hot spring kind of place. Because originally, when I'm thinking sauna, I'm thinking like indoor, like a building kind of thing. So I guess I'm not as grounded as I thought I was, personally. because it's like, oh, there's wet earth. Is it rocky? Is it just like dirt, just mud? Mildly confused. Second geyser sound had a gurgle. Okay. It was that dude dumping water, but from his stomach. I don't entirely know what that means. His stomach is dumping water? What does that even look like? His stomach dumped out a water cooler water like he was telling the sauna steps. So he's dumping the water on the steps with his stomach or from his stomach. Like his stomach is opening. Like this feels very surreal to me, but I don't know if it's supposed to. Um, it was that dude dumping water but from his stomach. So are we still in the present? It was that dude dumping water but from his stomach. Is he still dumping the water? Like his stomach dumps. Is it dumped or is it dumps? So again, a little confused on time. Out of water, cooler water. Like he is. Okay. Um, steps. Good game, coach. Okay. So we're like, so like imagine like a coach won a championship or something. So like they dump like the Gatorade on him. I do feel like usually dump out a water cooler. Goose on the sauna steps. Like Gatorade would have been helpful for me. I know it's like the name thing, but that's usually what I think of. You dump Gatorade on the cut, not just that. But maybe it's just me. Evidently, all the rest of us in the sauna watch too much football because our collective instinct is or was. Our collective instinct is to cheer and high five whenever we hear a water cooler dump. Okay. Okay. So there's other people in the sauna, and they're all excited because they hear this noise, and that's just how they normally react. Okay, fine. I'm with it. And then again, some tense things. So we charioted the sauna steps on our shoulders a couple of laps. It's like you're carrying the sauna steps. Okay, so the logical. So you cheer and high five whenever you hear that noise. We chariot the sauna. So the sauna steps are things you can like literally pick up. I think a lot of my confusion goes back to the sauna. I don't have a good enough idea about what the sauna exactly is like. I know that it has a higher level and a lower level. I know that apparently there's wet earth nearby if you roll around too much. Um, and apparently you can roll back from moving a higher level onto earth, I guess. Um, I know that there's geysers nearby. And apparently I know that these steps are removable. We went back to the water cooler. The water cooler itself or the person? Or is the person the water cooler? Who was real apologetic. Is it went back or go back? Again, some tense things as well. I'm also like, we chariot the stairs, the sauna steps on our shoulders a couple laps around the building. So is this what happens with these guys? So like when these sorts of things happen, they just automatically go find someone to grab and parade around. uh, without even realizing who or what they really are. We went back to the water cooler who was real apologetic. Again, the water cooler is the person or the actual water cooler turning into a person or that can talk. We said or we say it's okay or it was okay. Which one? Then he leaves or he left and staff cleaned the sun. Wait, what? And staff cleaned the sauna because the sun is dirty. I'm a little bit. But why is the staff cleaning the sauna? On my way out here, one of the staff dudes asked, "So who won?" And I didn't have the heart. didn't, maybe don't, and I don't have the heart to tell him no one. Okay, so I mentioned my confusion. I think having a greater idea about the sauna location-wise would be really helpful for me personally. Having a greater idea about this water cooler and how your stomach can dump it out. Like, is he vomiting? Like, is it like his stomach has a hand that can open water coolers? Is his stomach a water cooler? Does the stomach have a door that lets out water from a water? Like, I'm mildly confused by that part. How we got from the stanza with evidently, all the people high-fiving to suddenly parading around sauna steps, which are apparently removable. I'm a bit lost on the logic of that part as well. And you didn't have the heart to tell him no one. Why not? I hear one of the staff. Remember, the staff asks who won. Why couldn't you tell him no one? Why didn't the speaker have the heart to do that? Why would the staff have been like so disappointed? Like, I read the line, but I don't understand how we got to that conclusion. Yes, that's kind of my big thing there. That's something I'm unsure about. Like, I get the line, but I don't understand why the speaker feels that way. That they feel like they can't tell him, or they don't have the heart to tell him. I don't get it personally. So that's something I'll need to be explored a little more. Okay. But it's an interesting story. I'm here for it, but I think those points of confusion would allow me to kind of enter the poem more. Oh, the other thing too is also just the tenses, because the verb tenses to me got a little bit confusing. It seems like it in general wants to be present tense, so just kind of checking on that consistency. Okay, but thank you so much for sending that poem. We appreciate it. All right, guys. In fact, thanks to everyone who sent us the poems today. We appreciate all of people willing to share their work with us. Again, this is Diversus Poetry. This is something that we would like to do on Mondays, is people sending us their work, so that way we can take a look at it in a future stream. So if you have some work, you can find us on Threads. We are at Diversus Poetry. You can also find us there for many other platforms, including YouTube, Instagram as well. My name is Jeff. Thank you for spending part of your time with me here looking at poems. We hope to see your work in the future. And you guys have a good day, have a good night, and a good afternoon. Take care.